I will try. We have, in Nigeria, we talk of vertical transportation system. Lift falls under that category. And when we're talking of regulatory framework, the applicable regulatory framework for vertical transportation system in Nigeria, among them we have National Building Code, which talks about lift shaft and lobbies and fire rated separation, smoke detection, interlocks, machine room isolation, and ventilation. Then must come with emergency standby power for lifts. And another Nigerian industrial standard, that is NIS and SON. SON usually adopt international lift safety standard. Then certification and conformity to approved standard, which is usually not available unless by request through Standard Organization of Nigeria. Then we have some international standards that are applicable in Nigeria. We have EN 8120, EN 8150, and specifically relating to shafts, pit and headroom dimensions, maintenance and rescue access, safety devices, and component testing. Now, the regulators, what are they really looking at when you talk of lifts in buildings? We have life safety, fire protection, safety maintenance and rescue, reliable emergency operation. And from this, you will see that this regulation is not only optional, but it's something we must comply with. But the approach with which we comply with will determine the cost implication at the end of the day. Now, when we talk about the regulatory compliance, complying with regulations, what are these regulatory compliance about? The regulatory compliance transfers around just to ensure the safety. We talk about design and construction. That is CapEx, that is initial capital cost expended on lift. And when we have larger lift, it increases other components like concrete, steel finishes. Then we have dedicated lift lobbies, which is also a requirement. Then there will be increase in floor area used, that is reducing the usable floor area and increased finishes. Then pit and headroom requirements. We need more excavation and structural requirement, which has its own cost implication as well. Then standby and power automation, which will increase the cost of mechanical, electrical, and plumbing in building. Now, after the CapEx cost, we have operation and maintenance, which is OPEX. This is usually sometimes neglected, but it's part of the, compliance requirement. Mandatory inspection and certification, this is periodic. And preventive maintenance to safety standard. At all times, lift must comply with safety standard. But because of the high foreign components of the lift, we now talk of forex volatility, which will affect, the running cost of the lift after installation. Then at a certain period in the life of the lift, then there will be need for modernization to meet up with the current standard. Then recertification after major upgrade. So in most cases, the initial cost of lift will not exceed like 30 to 40% of the total cost that will be installed, while the compliance cost will take the remaining 60% because of the number of years it will span. Now, the major cost problem we have in this country, in Nigeria, is, our focus is usually on the lowest capital cost, then disregarding the compliance requirements. So compliance treated as only technical issue, and maintenance contract signed without long-term cost modeling, without looking at the components of the facility management that goes into lift. To break it down, it's usually in lump sum. Then the vendor locking and opaque pricing. This is common in our project because of the early preparation that usually lead to the award of contract for vertical transportation system in building. And the implication of this is not far-fetched. The risk associated with it, at the end of the day, we have a budget overruns, which is not what is interesting to the client for asset performance because of lack of attention to the various components and the facility management clauses. Then at the end of the day, our response is usually reactive. And when it is reactive, we have no opportunity to negotiate what the cost will be at that time, because we just have to meet up with the requirement. And some of the reality that comes up in Nigeria is sometimes designer don't consult with local vendors like PE Lift to lead over specification. And sometimes it's not the fault of the designer because of the haste with which the client want the project delivered. They don't relate perfectly with the specialist designer, so there will be over specification. Then foreign designs sometimes are copied without localization. Right sizing is safer because of over specification, there will be oversizing. And when we have right sizing, it's usually cheaper. And one of the reasons why lift shaft matters is the size of the lift matters. Yeah? When we have larger lift shafts, you have more concrete, more reinforcement will be used as structural element, the formwork, finishes, and the loss of lettable floor area. Lettable floor area sometimes is recorded as the commercial relate to commercial value of a building. And this will be cumulative throughout the entire span of the building. We have this risk associated with it. Now, and why do we have oversized SAP driven? Because important lift specifications, when the local vendors are not, consulted, then poor coordination between architects, engineers, and quantity surveyors. They're selecting the lowest capital cost is also a serious problem. But as a stakeholder in the industry, when quantity surveyors are engaged early, there will be a kind of cost-based trade-off analysis to ensure that it's over design, over specification, an unnecessary increase in the number of lifts required in building will also be minimized. Then advising on optimal shaft dimensions, protecting the net usable floor area. When usable floor area is protected, it is a lifelong matter. As long as the lift exists, that area will continue to be used. But the major problem that we have again is when we have all these issues at hand, are we really considering the whole life cycle cost of the vertical transportation in building, or we just look at the initial cost? This is a major issue. At the beginning of the project, stakeholders usually ignore the cost, the whole life cycle, and opt for lowest cost. And when we're talking of life cycle compliance, because the regulatory framework covers the entire lifespan of lift because of the safety requirements. And these key items, these 4 items, must be considered. Design and approval. There are stages of approval and it must comply with all these regulations. Installation and commissioning, operation, upgrade, and end of life. That is modernization required to meet with the evolving standard in the industry. Now, the life cycle costs as a result of what is required here is not only limited to capital and installation costs. We have to think of energy consumption. And we talk of energy consumption, we have equipment today that are already, we say, obsolete, that consume high energy. Energy saving equipment is far, far better. Though the initial cost may be higher, but because of this initial cost, an employer or house owners may opt for a holder system that is cheaper instead of considering energy consumption as a basis for choosing the vertical transportation system. Then how often is the maintenance required on the build, on the lift, the downtime and service disruption? This one major thing can lead to loss of reputation. If the downtime is longer than necessary, then modernization and regulatory upgrades. When is modernization required or regulatory or upgrade as a result of the regulatory provisions? Then replacement and disposal. So this one at the end of the day will transfer to about 60 to 70 of lift costs because this occur after the lift has been installed. But these components are not considered at the beginning of the project. It's a major problem. And that is where the role of quantity surveyors come in. As I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, I'm a quantity surveyor, and this will incline me to talk about what role does quantity surveying play when it comes to ensuring effective cost management of vertical transportation systems in building. Now, cost surveyors, I would say, are uniquely positioned to one. We have talked about life cycle costing requirement. Cost surveyors integrate this at the beginning of the project when tender is being prepared. Then, at the pre-contract also, the such dimension and number of leads will also be considered. Then, avoid vendor locking through open specifications. Vendors will want to play pranks on the developer by making sure that they enter into agreement that make them to be the sole facility manager when the lift break down, and then making sure that it complies with the regulatory framework within this lifespan of the lift. Then this demand, consequently, we always demand transparent, itemized maintenance pricing instead of lump sum. Then forecast compliance and modernization costs over 20 to 30 years. The volatility in forex will be taken into consideration in making this projection, so that when there are variations, there will be basis for changes in the projected at the beginning of the project and the reality at the end or during the maintenance period. Now, the role of the QS serves as a bridge between the global safety standard and the financial reality that we have at hand in Nigeria. During the procurement, consultants also play a significant role, because at the beginning of the project also, if you talk about life cycle cost comparison of compliant lift options, it's not limited to only one a lift component or proprietary brand. There will be comparison of life cycle to ensure that what are we spending at what point. Then avoiding proprietary locking, structuring performance-based maintenance contract, aligning warranties with compliance cycles, cost transparency in escalation clauses, availability in Nigeria. And the impact of this is we have predictable costs, reduced dispute, and better asset performance. This example of what will come to play. At the initial capital cost, the breakdown, of course, will be carried out by quantity surveyor. But this particular building, like a commercial building, has 4 number lift, and the quote from the vendor is 89 million for 356 million. So at the end of the day, the capital cost of 4 lifts in the building will be about 422 million. It does not end here. We go to annual operation and maintenance cost. You look at this, make comparison with other vendors, and come up with what is most reasonable. On this one, we have about 12.4 million as operation cost. Then mid-modernization years, we have 116 million for the. So at the end of the day, the life cycle cost summary will be about 844 billion. And you know what this one translates to, a number in the building. So early case engagement will ensure that all these value are competitively determined through analysis of available, alternative proposed by vendor. So it will optimize lift sizing, specify not proprietary. So all these can to about 15 to 30% reduction in the life cycle cost. In the beginning, the life cycle has been put to the fore to ensure that you are not only living in our own in our dream, thinking that only the initial cost will be the total cost of lift installation in building. So that is, the value of engaging quantity surveyors. Then to ensure also effective cost management at post-contract stage, when the project is being executed, valuation of duration, forecasting compliance-driven expenditure, which expenditure relate to compliance, then evaluating repair versus modernization, managing claims linked to forex volatility, design changes, regulatory upgrade. But if these ones are not predetermined at the initial stage of the project, it will be difficult to manage. Then at the end of the day, advising on replacement timing. So many cost overrun blame on regulation are actually contract management failures, which can be corrected or put in place when the cost consultant is engaged. Now, from this presentation, the real takeaway again and run through, lead compliance must be cost managed, not just enforced, based on the presentation I made. And it is important for us to be guided with life cycle costing instead of initial cost of the project. Then, quantity survey are critical to integrating cost, risk, and regulation. Now, the shaft sizing and lift numbers drive major costs. Imagine when a lift is omitted or unnecessary lift is added, what the cost will translate to. So this early engagement of QS will result into long-term saving. So it is recommended that, there is need to engage quantity surveyors early in lift system planning. They mandate life cycle cost analysis for vertical transportation system that integrate compliance costs into capital budgeting. Strengthen QS, engineer, defenders, and facility management collaboration to ensure that at the end of the day, the client knows what the vertical transportation system costs holistically, not just thinking of initial installation cost. This is the end of my presentation. I say thank you for your attention.